If for 2 or 3 or 4 days in a row, I push myself too hard and I don't get a lot of sleep, but I try to keep up my activity, either going to the gym or working or running errands, my immune system starts to shut down. And I usually start getting the onset of what feels like a cold.
In medical school, definitely, is that every trial and error and every test that you have to take, every all-nighter that you have to do, it truly is it's a barrier that was intentionally placed there to see whether or not you could handle the stress of what is at the end of the tunnel, which is dealing with multiple emergencies all at once, multiple patients, lives in your hand, and making sure that you can make the right decisions at the right time. Medicine,
law, friendship. This is Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik. You're listening to the Medical Legal Brief.
One doctor, one lawyer, and a whole lot of gray area. Welcome, listeners. Welcome back to another episode of the Medical Legal Brief here on our podcast with Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik. If you haven't already, just make sure you subscribe, follow whichever platform you want to, but we are predominantly on YouTube and Spotify. Again, we bring a lot of topics that tie in the medical and legal aspects of our careers and lifestyle, and hopefully today's episode will resonate with many of our listeners. Big news, though, Lawyer Nik actually just had his daughter. Tell us a little bit more how that's been, and how does that tie into our topic for today?
Coming along this podcast journey with us, we've been talking about the birth of my daughter here quite a bit lately as it got closer and closer. Last week, we had our baby girl. She is healthy, mom is healthy, and it has been quite the experience. It's on point. Doing my share of the edits for Children Podcast, I was actually sitting there as my wife was going through the easier part of labor. I don't know if you could say easier part of labor, but as she was sitting down, getting prepared for the big show, I was sitting there editing. And I'm like, this is so on point. I'm listening to us talk about children and all your advice about having kids, and I'm about to have a kid within the next 5 or 6 hours. It was a very joyous experience. Everything went well. There were a few moments, and this probably for every pregnancy, where you're looking around the room like, wait, what the hell is going on? You're trying to play catch up. And as the dad, I'm just there saying, all right, be strong for her. Don't faint. Don't do anything stupid. Don't look like an idiot. Just be supportive and help your wife get through this. And she got through it like a champion. Right now, baby girl is 11 days old as far as when we're recording this podcast. It's a good discussion point that today we're going to talk about sleep deprivation, because I am right there. I am trying to find my way around sleep, trying to find my way around naps, and so is my wife. Again, I'm just completely on point.
Let's just dive right into it. Tell us a little bit about the scenario. Being in the hospital, your wife's in labor. How are you trying to sleep? How is she trying to sleep? Are you guys able to sleep at all? And how long was that labor stage? How long did it last for? And how much sleep would you say you got in total during that time in the hospital?
Oh, I think this is the funny joke with a lot of fathers out there when their wives are in labor, is that you have to sleep on the most heinous, like, couch, chair, sofa thing. This weird fold out. We were actually induced. We went in on Sunday night for what they call ripening, to, I guess, prepare the cervix and get my wife ready to give birth. And it was like checking into a hotel. It was kind of weird. We showed up and the nurse was like, oh yeah, we have your room ready. Let's get your driver's license. This is where you're going to go, and wear your bags. And do you need any help with them? We get into the room and I'm looking around, and we had done a hospital tour before, but this room was a new renovated room. I'd never been in it before. And I'm looking at this chair. I'm like, is this the chair I'm supposed to sleep on? And the nurse is like, yes, it folds out. So she shows me how to fold it out. This is going to be miserable. And I am a pretty average guy in height and weight. I'm not too tall, not too short, not too big, not too small. But I looked at this chair, and if you over 6 feet or pushing 250, you're just a bigger guy. I don't know how you're going to sleep on this chair. And it wasn't a couch. It was literally like a lazy boy that just extended without all the comfort. So that first night, as they're getting ready, she did not get any sleep. The nurses were in every hour running tests, giving her medication, making sure that she was getting prepared. So my poor wife, I feel so bad for her, because she didn't get any sleep. For me, I got very interrupted sleep. I probably slept a total of 3 hours the entire night. And that wasn't until maybe around 5 o'clock in the morning when my body just gave in and said, all right, you just need to pass out. The next morning, you wake up with an adrenaline pump. You're like, this is game day. And we're about to do this. So it wasn't too bad. What ended up getting worse was that night we had her at about 8 o'clock in the evening, and we transitioned into the regular neonatal unit, or the regular children's unit, and I got upgraded. My chair was now a couch that folded out, which was nice. But we had a newborn, and the nurse is giving us all these tips, and she's saying, well, hey, if baby girl makes this noise, you might want to get up and check on her. If she makes this noise, you're fine. But if she makes this noise, she might be aspirating. So you need to get up and suction out her mouth. So the entire night, my wife and I didn't sleep. It was little girl making a noise and us jumping up to see. And it's funny because in our podcast about children, you had even mentioned, I'm a doctor. I know exactly what's going on. And I still would check every 20 minutes at poking my son or poking my daughter to see, are they alive? Totally had that experience.
Yeah, yeah. This is so funny that thinking of that, you going through it right now, and then thinking back 15, 20 years ago when we were in college, and just compare the sleep deprivation we had then, which was chosen. We decided to stay up late to do whatever we wanted to do, to party, to go hang out with friends. And I felt like, one, our bodies were younger, and so we could deal with less sleep at that time, but also it was a different type of stress, and it was more fun than actual stress. But it is just funny to think back and compare that as we get older and as we deal with life's wonderful gifts, our sleep patterns change throughout our lives. And so it's interesting to compare and look back at college and how we pretty much had the same sleeping habits back then, because we were probably woken up multiple times. We probably barely went to sleep as much, had to wake up, pull all-nighters to study, go out to parties, make long drives home for the holidays. So those are all things that we used to do. And yet it hits differently now that we're a little older, now that we're dealing with a family. I'm curious to see, what have you found out about yourself in terms of health, in terms of mental state, when you have not gotten the sleep, when you haven't gotten the full 6 to 8 hours that you typically would get?
It's funny that you say that and you bring up our college experiences, because back in our 20s, I felt like I was going to live forever. I felt invincible. If we stayed up all night, and maybe it was that we were playing video games, or we went to a party, or we went to a midnight showing of a movie, it didn't impact us. We would get up at 7, 8 for class, or we'd sleep until noon, and we would just be right back at it the next day. I was trying to motivate myself when I'm sleeping on that crappy couch, or when I have baby girl screaming and I'm staying up with her at night. I try to tell myself, you've been here before. You've slept on worse. You slept in worse places. The nurse came in at one point. She goes, are you comfy? I was like, I've slept on worse like floors. I'm fine. I'll get through it. And it's me trying to reassure myself that I'll be okay. But as I've gotten older, I have recognized that if for 2 or 3 or 4 days in a row, I push myself too hard and I don't get a lot of sleep, but I try to keep up my activity, either going to the gym or working or running errands, my immune system starts to shut down. And I usually start getting the onset of what feels like a cold. So with having baby girl now, I have to be really cognizant that that is something that my body will do in my age is almost a 40-year-old. I will start to go down a bad path of feeling sick. And that's the last thing I can do with having a newborn, is get sick and have to quarantine myself and put the onus on my wife. I've tried to be very cognizant of the amount of sleep I've been getting, as well as trying to take naps, as well as trying to just be healthy while I'm up, not trying to pound energy drinks, trying to take some vitamins, get some good vitamin C, get some time to be healthy. Because I truly feel that as I've gotten older, my body will start shutting down. For the first day or two, I'm solid. But day 3, day 4 of 4 or 5 hours of sleep and running really hard, it's not good and it's not healthy. And to your point, 20 years ago, that didn't happen. Now it's my body saying, hey, you need 7, 8 hours of sleep or you're going to be in for it.
Going into law school, then, what was your sleep schedule like there? And was sleep a priority for you through your studies, through your personal life? Where did sleep fall into the list of priorities when it came to schooling?
We talked about college. Sleep just came and went. We had breaks in the day to where you could go nap or you'd stay up really late. Didn't really matter. When it got to law school was a little bit more regimented. It felt more of a job, especially because I had to commute about 20, 30 minutes to my law school, making sure I was in bed by a certain time. I got enough sleep. That way I could show up at school refreshed. Granted, there were a few nights where you have to pull all-nighters. You're having to study or you're having to do a brief or do a paper. It was a good transition from the college lifestyle of sleeping to trying to get your career adult version of sleeping, because classes were still similar to college. You might have 2 classes a day with a big break, but it's not like you could just run home and take a nap. At least for me, I couldn't. I was up at the school all day long, so I had to make sure I was being appropriate with my time. But I always tried to make sure I got decent sleep. And at that point, I could run really well off 6 or 7 hours of sleep. Now, going into my career, that was completely different. And we'll get to that point in a second. But I want to ask you the same question. When you were in medical school, what was that sleep schedule like? And then you also have the additional going through as a resident, as an intern, so on and so forth.
I was actually very regimented in medical school because there were really 3 focuses that I wanted to make sure I pursued was 1, studying as much as I can, 2, eating as well as I could, and then 3 was just making sure that I actually got enough rest so that I could pursue the next day, that I could process all of the material that I was trying to study. I made it a focus that I would get at least 7 hours of sleep, no matter how little or how much I was studying, no matter when the test was, if it was the night before, a week before the test, I was still going to make sure that I got 7 hours. And it worked really well for me because, again, sleep plays a really big part in the processing and the way that your mind and body just process what has gone throughout the day. And we'll talk about more on the medical side and on the benefits and risks of not getting enough sleep or getting too much sleep. And so it was really important for me during medical school that I got the 6 to 8 hours that is recommended. And so I got my 7 hours no matter what. Whether I felt prepared for that test or not, I was still getting my 7 hours. A lot of my friends did not do that, and that's probably why they did much better than me in school. But I do think that I came out of medical school more excited and more lively, ready to go and hit residency. Residency within itself is a completely different game. That is, no matter how much you prioritize sleep, you aren't going to get any. As a family medicine resident, you are working not only in clinic, but you're also working in the hospital. So clinic months, those are nice. That's your 8 to 5 schedule. You come home, you can get your 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Whereas when you're in the hospital, you're usually on 12 hours, sometimes 24 hours in a row. You really have to try to pick the right time to either take a quick 5-10 minute power nap, or if you can try to squeeze in a 1 or 2 hour nap. You really can't plan too much because patients come in whenever they come in. When you're working in the hospital in that sort of setting, patients will come through the emergency room and need admission maybe 3 a.m. And then you might have a lull for an hour, and then all of a sudden you get 3 new admissions at 3 or 4 a.m. That schedule is a little bit more unpredictable. Therefore, your sleep schedule is a little bit more unpredictable. But because I loved what I did so much, I loved the medicine, I loved the residents I worked with, the program that I worked with, that honestly, I don't even remember being sleep deprived. I really, truly enjoyed my time there. It's really important for people out there who are looking to get into medicine that they make sure that they do right and do the research and interview at the right places. And you can find all this information. We talked about this in one of our episodes early on getting into medical school and what to look forward to. And so feel free to jump to that episode and hear more about those details.
I remember a few years ago, you were sending me pictures of work, and it seemed like you were in a hospital version of a hotel room for doctors. Was that correct, where you had your own bed and it was a place that you could fall back on if you just needed a quick nap while you were actually working?
Yeah, so this is very residency dependent or hospital dependent. If it's a very rich hospital, then yes, you may get your own room with a single bed. Our hospital, not that wealthy. So we actually had 2 bunk beds, which means we could squeeze 4 people into a single room. And it's what we call a call room. And so that's where either the senior resident or the intern or the junior resident would go and rest. The one that isn't going to be actively up taking admissions or seeing patients, then we try to allow that person on the team to get some rest. That way, at least someone is right of mind when we're dealing with medical emergencies. And so, yes, that room is very similar to a hotel room, except it's maybe a third or half the size of an actual hotel room. And there's usually no sinks or no kitchenware or anything like that. It's purely just a bed as well as a desk, and then you can turn the corner to get to a bathroom. Again, there are some hospitals that are a little fancier, that have a little bit more funding. They can afford bigger rooms, better maintenance, furniture, things like that. But ours did not.
One of the phrases I pulled out of there, which is really important for both medicine, law, and any high caliber profession where there's a lot of substance on the line, is right of mind. Being able to get enough sleep to be right of mind, because you're making very, very important, big decisions. And in your case, as a doctor, life or death decisions. And you have to make it fast and you have to try to be as accurate as possible. There is, and I got this when I transitioned to my legal profession, there is this push, especially from more senior veteran doctors, lawyers, business people, what have you, to try to see where your limits are at, to try to see, can you ride a night and do an all-nighter? Can you really push yourself and be competent and be accurate and make the right decision, and trying to find your limits? I think that my mentors, whether it was in the law firm or in aerospace, let's see how far we can push you to see where your breaking point is at. I remember specifically that my manager and one of my friends at the aerospace company, when I first came on, we went on our first trip and we're traveling and we're trying to get our deliverable out. And the first night, he's like, we're going to do this. We're going to sit here in this hotel lobby and we are going to try to put this package together the first night and see how far we can go. And I knew it was a test. The other people on my team warned me that this was coming. You can correct if I'm wrong, but I think there's a benefit to seeing where your limits are at and almost exercising that, really trying to figure out where you can push it to. And that way you can still be confident in your abilities. But I think there's a point of no return where you're just not going to do well. Have you seen that in practice, to where there's a push to a certain point, but after a certain point, you're just crap. You're not going to do well?
This is a twofold answer for this really tough question. I do think that, one, the US cultivates a society where we focus in on work a lot, and that work gives you the self-worth. If you're able to pull that all-nighter, you're able to work through hardships, then you are looked up more, like you are put on a pedestal, and that you're able to devote more time to the company and the employer. That tends to be a good outlook in our society. Again, that comes from that capitalistic economy that we enjoy here in the US. We talk about more about that in our episode on capitalism versus socialism. But I do think that part stems from the way our society just looks at work. Hardworking is always important, but we really prioritize putting in the hours. And so that's why we see a lot of students dedicating so much time and so much of their life to their careers. The other part is, you're right, it's almost like weeding out the weak. You're making sure that you can handle what is to come. The idea in medical school definitely is that every trial and error and every test that you have to take, every all-nighter that you have to do, it truly is it's a barrier that was intentionally placed there to see whether or not you could handle the stress of what is at the end of the tunnel, which is dealing with multiple emergencies all at once, with multiple patients, lives in your hand, and making sure that you can make the right decisions at the right time. Of course, no one is perfect. There are always going to be mistakes that are made, but we want to try to minimize those mistakes as much as possible. And so the way that our system has been created is that we now have created these steps. You go through medical school where you're expected to study 24/7. And then if you're able to make it through that, then you go to the next level. The next level is residency, where you're putting more than 24/7. I mean, you couldn't believe it, but we're working, 60, 80, 100 hours per week to learn our craft. We're not only making sure that we can handle the stress, but making sure that we repeat and do the repetitive motions of treating the same types of ailments, doing the same sort of procedures, so that when we are sleep deprived, at that point, now it's just based on memory. You're just doing it because you've done it so many times. And so it lowers those risks of mistakes. However, there is a line that can be crossed, just like you taking in alcohol, using a drug or a substance that could alter your mind. Sleep deprivation is absolutely very similar to that. You wouldn't want to go driving after you haven't had any sleep for 24 hours. You would be making poor decisions. Your reaction may be slower. Your decision choices may be different than what it would be when you had a full night's rest. There is definitely a fine line, and we do see that. And I do think we push the envelope. There are a lot of restrictions nowadays, a lot of rules and regulations to try to limit those sleep deprivation shifts. We used to have no limits on working. I would say 30, 40 years ago, it was just unlimited. If you were asked to work, you worked. Nowadays, there are requirements that you're only only allowed to work 24 to 36-hour shifts straight, and then you have to have a 24-hour rest period. You can't continue to work. Obviously, there are people who may be working more under the table, and that again is a hush hush. You really shouldn't be doing that because of those risks and liability of making mistakes. To answer your question, it's twofold. I do think it is to make sure that we can handle stress, but two, it's just that the nature of what our culture and our workforce has instilled in us is making sure that we work a lot and sleep little.
I like the way that you put it, where you have these barriers to entry. Coming out of high school, you either go into your career or you go take a gap year, you go to college. But let's say you go to college, that's a new barrier to entry. Can you go off on your own? Can you manage your own schedule? Can you attend classes? Can you still study? Can you get good grades at a higher level? And then you graduate, you go into your big boy, big girl job, or you go into grad school. And it's the same thing. It's, can you deal with the objectives and tasks that are placed in front of you? So I like the way that you put it, because yes, law school, that's exactly right. You are preparing to be a lawyer. So you're preparing for all the reading and all the studying and being up at the law school and having to manage multiple different priorities all at once. Because when you get out into practicing as a lawyer, you might have a client load of 80 different clients or more. And so you have to be able to transition from, okay, what does this client need this morning? And then I need to be on a call, and then I need to have this client in the afternoon, and I need to go to the courthouse for this, and I need to file that. It starts preparing you. And you're exactly right. If you can't get through that in law school or medical school, you're not going to be successful at the next level. So by getting through that barrier, that is an approval of, yeah, you'll get through this. You got through law school. Wonderful. Now the next thing, the bar exam. Okay, you got through the bar exam. Okay, now you can be an attorney. Now you're going to go practice at whatever firm or whatever job, and they're going to start putting down their established practices. And if you can meet those practices, wonderful, you'll be successful at that firm. If not, you might go someplace else or find another career. I noticed that in my career as a family law attorney, when I got in, it was a small firm. It was just us. We had to take care of business. If something called for a late night client consult, we would maybe have a client consult at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. We knew it was going to last 3 hours. Home at 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm gonna get 5 hours of sleep. I gotta turn around, put my suit on, and then get to the courthouse, and then be able to make competent, accurate arguments. Now, that's not always the case. If that was consistently the situation, there'd be a lot of burnout. But at the same time, that does exist. You got to push yourself, and you got to kind of feel out, is this right for me? Is this right for my future? I know that as a lawyer, because we were on such a regimented schedule, my sleep was pretty good. However, it was those random things got thrown into the day, or we have to stay up and we have to write a briefing for the court. We have to put together this evidence binder. We have to have this client prepped and ready to go. And you may not go to sleep until 3 or 4 in the morning and wake up for 8 o'clock trial. But after a while, you start getting used to it. It's when you're pushed past a certain limit that you have to really start reevaluating. Is this sustainable, or is this going to impact my health negatively? Am I getting a good work-life balance? Those considerations.
So think back to those years that you had the least amount of sleep, like regular sleep. What would you say a lot of your clients or maybe people around you, did they ever mention anything to you? Did they point out the way you looked or the way you acted? Did they mention any downfalls or issues because they saw that you were sleep deprived?
Within the firm or within the aerospace company, it was, you look like shit. Did you sleep last night? And you kind of know, because you were in the trenches with them. You embraced it with your colleagues. If we were all staying up for a trial, we knew the next day we were all not going to look good. We were going to look a little disheveled. So you try to put yourself together as best as possible. Because one of the things about being at least a trial attorney is you want to look good. You want to present yourself as competent, confident, put together. So you want to show up clean. You want to show up shaven and have the nice crisp suit on. And that was part of it, was making sure that even if you got a lack of sleep, you were showing up looking ready to play the part. I don't think I ever had a client look at us and say, "Are you guys okay? Are you guys ready for this? You guys look like you haven't gotten a lot of sleep." In fact, you almost go into God mode in front of clients, where they look at you like, "How can you do this? How I know you were at the office last night, because I was at the office and you guys were still there working, and now you're here and you look fresh and you look ready to go." And then they hear you argue, or they hear you talk to the opposing counsel or the judge, and they think you're invincible. There's a little bit to that when you're able to push yourself and kind of put on that act of, I'm fine. The lack of sleep isn't anything. We can get through this. But by the end of that day, what they don't see is that you go back to your apartment or you go back to your house, you throw the suit jacket to the side and you face plant in your bed and you take like a 4 hour nap because it's just all caught up with you. Appearances are important. At the aerospace company, we had a lot of that when we were on travel because we would try to get our deliverables on travel. But again, you are there with your colleagues that are doing the exact same thing. You're all sitting around a table trying to stay up and get the deal done, get the negotiation done. And everybody back home at home base knew exactly what was going on. So they would check in on you. It was, hey, did you get enough sleep? Hey, are you doing okay? That's one thing that's very important in any profession is just checking in on your peers, checking in. No, if they're in a position that they didn't get a lot of sleep, just the simple commiserating. Hey, are you okay? Did you get enough sleep? Okay, make sure that you do what you need to do today, but get back to your hotel room and try to get a nap in. Try to take care of yourself. Maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, that wasn't the case, but now people are more cognizant of trying to make sure that their employees are still taking care of their mental health and making sure that they're not burning out.
Yeah, I want to follow up on the medical manifestations or the physical, mental manifestations of sleep deprivation. You kind of already mentioned it. A lot of us grew up to be very good at hiding it. I do believe that being a doctor, being a lawyer, a part of being a good doctor and lawyer is being an actor, a good actor and actress, right? Being able to hide the pain, the suffering that we may be dealing with, the stress that we may be dealing in our personal lives, and not bringing it to work, not bringing it to our clients or our patients. That's usually how most people view doctors and lawyers, that we're usually put together. And so most of what I'm going to speak to are usually comments made by other colleagues, comments made by family who see us when we are at our weakest, when we haven't put up that persona. A lot of the physical manifestations are going to be acne. You're going to have dark circles. Skin's going to sag a little bit more. It's just not going to be as smooth. So those are all like the dermatological manifestations. But other physical manifestations is you may not be eating as correctly, as well as you should be, or as healthily. You're choosing easy choices, rather quick and easy choices, rather than the healthy choices. And so you may gain some weight. You may physically feel more fatigued, obviously, if you haven't had enough rest, but your energy level may be low. You may be slower to respond to certain questions or answer. You may be able to recall a lot slower, things that may not come as easily to you. So those are other concerns that come with it. Now, if we want to talk about the internal, true like medical issues, like if you're not sleeping well, that can lead to high blood pressure. That can increase your risk of heart attacks and strokes because your high blood pressure. It can potentially be a sign of sleep apnea. Maybe you're not sleeping well because there are other physical causes of why you're not sleeping well. You're snoring. There's an obstruction. So there's a lot of other medical reasons why it's so important that you do get that sleep, not only from a physical standpoint, but also a mental standpoint. Some people may get really hangry. If they're really hungry, they haven't slept, like on top of that, they're going to be really angry, short-tempered, more easily to blow up on people around them. Usually it's not the client or the patient, but it's usually a family member that they're really close to or a friend that they're really close to, and they feel more comfortable letting all that out. But like you said, you hit a wall at some point. No one can go without sleep for a very long time. They eventually will hit that wall and it will explode on someone. And so hopefully you're not one of those who encounter that and be the victim of that explosion.
And I've experienced that myself where I've noticed in maybe a week of getting no sleep because I have a deadline to meet that I feel cruddy. Like I haven't gotten sleep, so I'm not working out. I'm not eating right. I'm on a weird schedule to where sometimes I'm hungry, sometimes I'm not. I'm relying on caffeine. So I'm at 3 or 4 cups of coffee a day. I'm throwing in 1 or 2 energy drinks just to survive. And so you're going through the highs and lows of the caffeine and the sugar intake. It's not a healthy way to live. And it wasn't until the last maybe 5, 6 years that I really started focusing on you need to make sure that you get enough sleep. And I would make decisions based on that to where if let's say I had a pressing deadline, I would try to do the risk and reward of, is this worth my sleep? If it's not worth my sleep, I need to go and at least get a few hours of shut eye to then not get so far behind. But if it's something that really needs to get done, okay, I'll pony up and I'll have a sleepless night trying to get it done. You're spot on. It just starts impacting everything. You start putting on weight. Your body starts doing weird things. You're getting cramps. You're getting aches and pains. Your gut health goes to crap where you're starting to feel like your gastro is not doing well. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. All tied together. Mental health, physical health, work-life balance. We try to harp that through all of our episodes is just making sure you find that balance between work and your own health and your own personal lives. But the other thing I want to throw out there is you can go through life without caffeine. I'm one of those unicorns is that I actually never ever used caffeine, whether that was sodas, teas, coffee through medical school, residency, work. I've never really had the taste for it. I never really enjoyed it. I would say the only time I've ever used caffeine is if we're talking about having like a Red Bull and vodka or like back when we were doing Jaeger bombs. Like those are the only times I really used caffeine. And it wasn't to keep me awake. It was just because it was what we were drinking at the time.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, have you ever used any sort of sleep aids in your life? Any certain supplements or medications to help you sleep better?
I just want to point out before I answer that question, you are also the king of power naps. When I nap, I need to be out for 3 or 4 hours. When you nap, you get 10 minutes of sleep and you are a whole new person. It's like you got a full 8 hours. I've always been very impressed by that. But to your question, back in my 20s, I was having some problems sleeping. And I actually talked to my PCP about it, and the recommendation was melatonin. So I used to take melatonin to help me get to sleep because my mind would race, especially in law school. My mind's racing. You become a lawyer. You're always constantly thinking about your next argument or what's on your to-do list. So I would start using melatonin to help calm me down. I've never taken a prescription sleep aid, I don't think, other than maybe having major surgeries where they need you to get some rest and get some sleep. But melatonin teas, like a calming tea, I've relied on that as a wind down. And I've learned that this is bad. But there was a point in time where I would have a nightcap, maybe a little drink of whiskey where the days wind down and you're like, well, I'm going to relax. I'll pour myself a good whiskey and sit there and drink the bourbon and help wind down. But I've also learned that that is not good for the system either. But if I'm looking for a sleep aid, I'll look for some sort of relaxation technique mixed with melatonin, mixed with like a tea. But I've also come to the realization, I want your opinion on this, is that technology has impacted my sleep tenfold because you start laying in bed and you start doom scrolling and you want to check that last email or that last text message, or you're trying to fall asleep watching your favorite Netflix show. And so you're not giving yourself the ability to competently fall asleep. So I'm very aware of that, to where sometimes it's just turning off every light in the room, turning off the TV, turning off the tech, having it just be peace and quiet, maybe sometimes using a sound machine and having the ambient noise. Sometimes that's all you need. A lot of people could probably get rid of half their sleep problems by just putting the phone up and putting the TV up and just going to sleep caveman style. Shut off all the lights and just lay in bed till you fall asleep, and it'll eventually get better.
I'm very impressed, Nick. That is half the conversations I have with patients. And patients obviously come to me to talk about sleep issues, insomnia all the time, looking for sleep aids. And this is by no means medical advice at all, but this is just a discussion that I usually have with most of my patients and just general understanding of how to get better sleep. But the first step is always sleep hygiene. What is involved in sleep hygiene is exactly as you said, making sure we have no blue screens on. I usually recommend 30 to 45 minutes before you plan on sleeping, have no blue screens on. And that would be your phone, tablet, TV, anything that has a blue screen, because that will excite your brain so that it keeps it more awake and more stimulated. And you don't want that. You want it to start slowing down and turning off as much as you can. Another thing, like you said, is a sound machine that will help soothe, turning off all the lights, making sure there are no bright lights in the room. Another thing is just making sure that the room that you sleep in is dedicated just for sleep. I find that more patients who have a huge TV in their room tend to sleep worse because it's not just a sleeping room. It's now a TV room, an entertainment room, all sorts of other reasons why they're in that room. So if you can dedicate specifically a room and a bed just for sleep, then your body will know that. It likes to have that familiarity. Now, if those sleep hygiene things don't work, the next step would be melatonin. There are a lot of brands out there, a lot of supplements that utilize melatonin. They come in pills, they come in gummies, all sorts of melatonin-esque supplements. I usually recommend 3 to 6 milligrams. I usually don't recommend going over that. Melatonin is a naturally formulated hormone that your body does make, but sometimes you can get too much, which can throw your circadian rhythm off. Melatonin is only meant as a short-acting or short-term use. It's something that you use maybe for 2 to 3 weeks to reset your circadian rhythm. It's not meant to be used long-term. That's why I see patients fall into that trap where they start with 3 milligrams, use it for 2 months, and then all of a sudden they're now needing 6 milligrams, and then a year later they're on like 9 or 12 or 10 milligrams. And that's just way too much. That's not what your body needs. You're now just using some other supplement to fix a problem that you're not truly fixing. Once you've tried the melatonin, then you have these other over-the-counter medications like you said, chamomile tea is an option. Benadryl, so like an antihistamine that has a side effect of fatigue or sleepiness, you can utilize that to your benefit, taking it before bedtime. Again, not ideal. Maybe using it on a trip and you're trying to beat the jet lag. Taking that for 1 or 2 nights would be reasonable, but doing it longer than that, not very healthy for you at all. Not something that your body likes. Once you've done all those over-the-counter natural options, then the only other option for you to have is to go over and talk to your primary care, your physician. And the options that we have is, one, go do a sleep study. We want to make sure, is there any physical manifestation or physical issue that could be causing you to not sleep well? Do you have sleep apnea? Do you have huge tonsils that's blocking your airway? Maybe you need to lose a little bit of weight to sleep better. Maybe you're exercising right before bedtime. That's going to cause a lot of endorphins, a lot of other hormones to keep you excited so that you may not fall asleep as easily or as well. There are some people who actually do better by working out before sleep. So again, trying to figure out what your body needs. And then we start talking about actual prescription medication. So the most common is going to be your trazodone. That is an antidepressant. Using it at lower doses, it works well for sleep. And then we start going into more of the controlled substances. We're talking about like Ambien, Lunesta, and those are controlled. They can be habit forming. You usually do have to do random drug screens. You have to sign a controlled substance contract with your physician. Again, a big discussion that you need to have with your physician, but not something that I usually prescribe, not something that I usually go to. I do find that sleep hygiene, as well as the natural medications, and sometimes the trazodone will be enough for patients. Now, if the Ambien and Lunesta isn't not enough, some people will consider benzos. But this is, again, a medication that has been around for a long time. We know the history. We know the addiction rate. A lot of older docs use it for a sleep aid, but a newer generation of docs do not. We try to avoid that. We try to use it worst case scenario. And then lastly, there are antipsychotics. The side effect of antipsychotics is it makes you sleepy. So things like Seroquel, olanzapine. So these are things that ideally we don't use, but if we are at our last rung and there's nothing else that has worked and this is what we have to do, then that's what we do. Other cases that we can use it for are people who do have psychosis or have bipolar, and we want to use that medication to treat both sleep as well as their other psychological ailment. So that's kind of like the surface level information on just sleep aids. And again, having that conversation with your primary care physician is really, really important. Definitely don't buy anything that you don't know off the streets, and definitely don't take anything from someone else just because they offered it to you.
I feel like that's definitely a thing where you think of the stress, the image of maybe the stressed out housewife or the too tired businessman that's just running and running, where it's like, hey, do you have a pill that I can take? I need this pill so I could sleep on the plane. I need this. And so you're getting these pills via non-official routes, like channels. You hear Ambien and benzos. There's almost like this relation to like an underground drug market, as opposed to somebody actually needing that prescription. To underground drug markets, I want to ask you another question. I'm always one to plug our previous podcast, but we had a discussion about medical marijuana. And there are a lot of people that rely on marijuana as well as a sleep aid. Do you have an opinion on marijuana as a sleep aid?
Again, I would always point us, most of our listeners, back to that episode so you can hear the full story and the full discussion there. Medical marijuana can be utilized safely in small amounts in the right amount of time, short-term use only, not really meant for long-term, because then you do start feeling some of those long-term effects. Again, in that episode, we dive into long-term effects, the side effects, what can it cause, what can it lead to. And so, yes, it's an option, but it's the same thing. You want to make sure you have that discussion with your primary care physician, make sure that it's legal in your state, and then decide whether or not it's something you want to try and in what sort of formulation you want to take it in.
What is your favorite sleep aid as a doctor? What do you like to rely on? Is it sleep hygiene? Do you like a little bit of chamomile tea? What do you go to?
Well, for me personally, but also what I would recommend to my patient, it's always that sleep hygiene. And I find that my best sleep is when I put down that phone or I don't watch TV and maybe just read a book 30 to 45 minutes before bed. I tend to fall asleep very easily and stay asleep all night from that. And again, most patients who truly do that find a lot of benefit. It's the people who try to do it for a little bit, but then they still end up picking up their phone 5, 10 minutes after they've tried and then say that they failed because it just didn't work out.
Yeah, yeah, that is something that I've been guilty of in the past of trying to lay there and you're like, well, if I'm gonna be up, I might as well watch a fun YouTube video.
I have a follow-up question for our discussion here on sleep deprivation. So, as we are both high education professionals and we do a lot with clients and patients, sometimes things go wrong, mistakes are made. Is there any sort of legal ramifications, or oh, is there anything that we can stand on to say that, hey, we made this mistake because we were sleep deprived? Is that a thing? Is that something? Because we see a lot of shows where people will claim that they were a psychotic or crazy and they're able to get out of the full on ramifications of their mistake. Is that something you can utilize as well for insomnia or for sleep deprivation?
Floor answer, it depends. We say that every episode. But there are situations, because this can go both ways. It can go to where if you are deprived of sleep, or even if you are maybe taking a sleep pill that makes you sleepy, you would be the first that if you're prescribing an Ambien or a Lunesta, you're going to tell your patient, do not operate a motor vehicle, do not get in the car, do not drive, do not operate heavy machinery, just go to sleep. So you have both sides of what is that individual doing while they're under that 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 situation. So in the case of maybe a person who hasn't slept well, there could be claims of negligence. If you knew that you weren't sleeping well, if you knew you had been up for 48 hours and you're like, well, I'm going to go to work and go drive my 18-wheeler across the country, you might be held liable. You might be considered negligent because you knew that you hadn't gotten enough sleep and you still decided to get behind the wheel. So it could bolster evidence against you in certain situations. And a lot of the times you can fall back on just negligence. You didn't really take the consideration to do something or not do something. Would a reasonable person have done it in your same situation? Were you, in fact, negligent? Another thing that kind of comes to the forefront is what we call mens rea. So Latin mens rea is your mental state. When you're in a, let's say, a trial and you're trying to present evidence or you're trying to question a witness, most of the time you want to show intent. You want to show that somebody had the intent to do something. Well, depending on how good of a lawyer you are, you might be able to argue that an individual who hadn't had a lot of sleep was impaired, and so they lacked a certain intent, or maybe they acted in a certain manner because of the sleep deprivation. Now, it's not something that you can use as a full-blown defense and say, hey, I didn't get enough sleep, so I didn't mean to do that, so I should be found not guilty. It's more so of, can it impinge the argument to then maybe lay some doubt or maybe lay some foundation that that person was actually guilty of something. When you're looking at sleep deprivation from a legal standpoint, you're looking at, did it impair the intent? Would it have happened anyways? Was a person negligent and not getting enough sleep? Just like, were they negligent in taking the Ambien and getting behind the wheel to go on a road trip? It's just a matter of how you can argue things. There's also situations when you're looking at criminal law, police interrogations, so on and so forth, where were you keeping the suspect or the criminal up too long and then you're trying to elicit confessions from them, knowing that if you push them past their limits, you're going to be able to maybe get them to say something that they shouldn't have said. Um, and then you also have the impact of judges and lawyers and police officers and those in the legal field, where if we're sleep deprived, how does that impact everything? If I am having a death penalty case and I'm defense attorney, if I'm not getting enough sleep, am I going to make the competent argument? Am I going to make the right decision? Just like we were talking about you as a doctor, are you going to make the proper life or death choice to have your client escape the death penalty or not get sentenced or defend somebody appropriately. There's many different realms that you can go in from a legal standpoint, but to answer your overall question, it depends, and you can argue both ways of it. You can argue that sleep deprivation may have led to something that was out of character, and maybe that's a cause for no intent. Or you can argue that the individual was negligent in what they were doing because they should have known better. The reasonable person would have known not to do the thing based on the fact that they haven't slept in 24, 48, 72 hours.
Yeah. So the takeaway is the onus is on the individual. Just make sure you get some rest. Make sure you get
Always.
some sleep. Again, I know that our culture here in the U.S. is all about working, and the more you work, the more important that you are, the more that you bring home. Generations after us, they are starting to find that work-life balance better. And so I hope that our listeners will feel the same and hopefully yield the same things that we're talking about right now.
And I have a medical question for you. And you hear this phrase all the time: I need to go catch up on sleep. I need to sleep and catch up on sleep. Is that a real thing? Is there a such thing as catching up on sleep?
No, I wish. When you talk about catching up on sleep, you feel like it sounds like there's a bucket of sleep that you need to fill. And then once it fills, then you're good. But it's not that way at all. If you've already missed 8 hours of sleep last week, you sleeping 8 hours this week, it's not going to make up for what you felt that last week. So, no, that is just a phrase that we use, that we throw out, but it is not medically relevant.
Okay. Yeah. Because I've heard that many times, and I've heard people say, oh, yeah, I could catch up on this. I'll just turn around tomorrow and sleep for another 12 hours. It's like, I don't think it works that way.
No, you just got to get the same 6 to 8 hours of sleep every night.
Is that something that most doctors recommend when you're looking at sleep? Try to get 6 to 8 hours of sleep every single night as an adult?
Correct. Yep. 6 to 8. I would say that as you're younger, you get more sleep. As you lead into your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, you can probably do a little less, maybe 7 hours. And then as you get older, that's when you want to get more sleep, but then you can go either way. A lot of elderly patients will struggle with falling asleep or staying asleep. So they end up only getting 4 to 6 hours of sleep, and they don't do well then either. And that can also lead into memory issues and dementia. Not necessarily a direct correlation, but I can see that a lot of people who don't sleep well just are more forgetful. It's really important that you go through these different stages in life, that you get as much rest as your body needs. And you'll know, if you go a week and you're sleeping 8 hours every day and you feel great, then your body's telling you need 8 hours.
And is there a certain time period of the day? Obviously, you want to benefit from it being night. You want to go to sleep at night. But for our peers or those individuals that work overnight shifts, are they at a detriment because they may have to get that 6 or 7 hours in the middle of the day when it's nice and bright outside? Are they doing themselves a disservice just by the nature of working overnight?
They are. Yeah. The reality is our overnight workers, our late night shift workers, what they do is a detriment to their health. It's more stressful to work at night. Their circadian rhythm is off. It's usually a lot harder to sleep during the daytime. They may get blackout curtains. They may have a quiet room, but still their natural circadian rhythm wants to sleep when everyone else is sleeping. That is something that they're constantly fighting every day. That may increase their risk of anxiety, their risk of depression, a lot of other medical and psychological issues that could come about by doing those overnight shifts. I always try to recommend patients find those daytime work hours, but I know that we need our overnight shift workers too. So I wish they could get paid more.
Yeah. That would be very nice.
Mhm.
So any final words, Dr. Long, as we wrap up here on this episode?
No, we talked about all the different stages of sleep deprivation through college, when it was fun and fun and exciting, down into our medical and law school careers and into our actual big boy jobs, and how sleep deprivation can be a liability on us. I hope everyone takes a lot from our conversation.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Medico-Legal Brief, where medicine meets the law. I'm lawyer Nick. That's Dr. Long. And it's been a great conversation about sleep. If you haven't already, please go in, subscribe, like, follow. We're on YouTube. We're on Spotify. We like to engage with the comments. We're on LinkedIn now and TikTok. So give us a follow on whatever platform you prefer. And with that, we hope that you guys get some good rest and get some good sleep. Yes, we're doctors. Yes, we're lawyers. No, this podcast is not medical or legal advice. Do not take anything we say as a reason to perform your own heart surgery, represent yourself in court, or diagnose your neighbor's rash. This is for entertainment only. Think of it like hanging out with your smartest, wittiest friends, not a substitute for an actual appointment. If you act on anything we say without talking to your own professional, that's on you. Seriously, don't do that.